Well, the Toronto Maple Leafs certainly have access to stuff that a lot of us don't because it was a little strange, the players that they picked, but let's get into it. So the Toronto Maple Leafs have been a team that goes against a lot of convention with a lot of their draft picks, but in retrospect often doesn't look that bad when they do so. But I do think they went in a little bit of a more NHL conventional route, looking at Ben Danford with the 31st overall pick. Now, I had Danford a little bit lower towards the beginning of the third round, but that's only because players like Ben Danford are just not a huge priority for me in the NHL draft. I think Ben Danford projects pretty easily and simply to be a third pair defenseman that is good at what he does, eats minutes, can kill penalties, and move the puck better than you would think for a player with his stature. I think he's a pretty well-rounded defenseman, and there were moments where I had him pretty high in my second round. I just wonder about just how much he's going to bring at higher levels, outside of just a safe, dependable, physical defenseman that can play the physical style of play, but in a very effective way. I didn't mind this pick at 31st overall though, because I honestly don't mind a team's strategy in that range being, let's get a guy who can play in our lineup and play pretty well, even if he's not the highest upside guy, and I think that might be Ben Danford. I expect him to take a step forward offensively this season, and I think there could be an interesting selection here for Toronto. At 120th, the Toronto Maple Leafs went totally off the board and drafted Victor Johansson, a defenseman from Leksand, brother of Detroit draft pick Anton. Now, I went and watched him, and I kind of liked what I saw. He's a decent skater, he's got really good skill for a guy that skates like him. He is about as thin as a paperclip, and I think there's a lot of physical development on the way, but similar things were said about his brother when Detroit drafted him, and he's become a solid defensive player in the SHL since then. I think this is an upside bet long term that he's going to end up something like a solid third pair guy maybe, but I do think that this is going to be an interesting one for Leaf fans to monitor in the next few years. Would I have drafted him? Probably not. I thought there were some better players available, but it's an interesting swing to take that could develop into a decent player in the future based on what I saw. Then Toronto had two back-to-back picks at 151 and 152. With the first, they went in the fun direction with Miroslav Hinka. This was a player who was on my watch list after seeing him at an international tournament in the midseason, and when I took a closer look, I saw just a player who was a lot of fun. He has a lot of skill in the game, and he isn't a small player either, and I do think that in the Czech Pro League games that I saw, there were some interesting moments, and the skill is certainly there, and there's a pattern here. Skill, 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 skill. And people even noticed this at the Leafs' recent development camp over the last month. Is there much around all of that I think is going to develop him into a potential steal? Not really right now, but there could be. It's possible. This is a pick that I think has really high upside and a really low floor, and in this range, that's kind of what you want. Hinka is definitely one of the more fun players that didn't end up on my list at the end of the year, so at this range, I thought it was an interesting selection that was pleasantly surprising. At 152nd overall, Toronto drafted tall, lanky forward Alexander Plasovsky from Mamonty Ugry in the Russian Eastern Division of their junior league. This team was great this season in a pretty soft level of competition. Plasovsky didn't really stand out to me all that much, but he is tall and has some skill and a pretty good shot on him as well. I do wonder about the pace of his game. I'd like to see more intensity, and he does need to fill out physically, but he's big and brings some interesting tools to the game. At this range, I think there were other names I would have gone after, but again, thinking long-term development, there could be something here, I suppose, and you can leave him in Russia for quite a few years, and the Mamonty Ugry program is pretty decent when you scale up to the KHL. Shortly after that, at 157th, the Toronto Maple Leafs drafted another Russian, but a goaltender from the Red Army team in Moscow, and Timofey Obvintsev. Now, I heard a little bit about Obvintsev from people I know in the sport towards the end of the season, and I went and watched him, and I actually really like this guy. In terms of athleticism and just overall smarts in net, Obvintsev brings a lot to the table. Again, I'm not a goaltending expert, but he is a player that I did think about putting on my goaltending list at the end of the year, but I just hadn't seen enough to really know that I should do that. But people do seem to like this kid, and I'm not surprised that a team like Toronto is taking a swing on him. The deeper analytics I pulled on him were pretty good, and what I saw of Obvintsev was pretty solid as well, and their track record with goaltenders over the last few years has been pretty solid. Then, with the first of their trio of 7th round draft picks, Toronto drafted Matt Leahy. Now, Leahy is pretty young, played in the BCHL for the Nanaimo Clippers, and I went and watched him, and I don't know. He's got some range to him, he's a decent skater, got a decent shot on him as well. I just didn't see anything that really moved the needle a tremendous amount for me, but you can leave him in college for a while, and it was 200th overall. At 216th, they drafted one of the older first-time eligibles in the draft in Sam McHugh of the Owen Sound Attack. Now, I went and watched him because I hadn't seen him before the draft, and again, I mean, if he turns out to be a thing, fine. He's big, he's powerful, got some shot quality on him as well, but I wasn't really blown away with his game, to be perfectly honest, and I think he's an okay hockey player at the junior level. level. We'll see where he goes in the next season or two, but I just think this is a bit of a long shot, and I probably would have gone in a different direction if I were Toronto. Then at 225th, they drafted Nathan Mays, and I was seated in the audience with someone who works a lot in the WHL, and I had never heard of Mays, and I asked him about him, and he kind of leaned back and said, "Huh, nice to see him drafted. He's not going to play, but it's nice to see him drafted." And I think after watching him, that's also something I came away thinking as well. Again, a younger player for the draft class. I found him to be a decent skater, got around the ice okay as well, which was a bit of a pattern for these types of players that Toronto drafted on the back end this year. But I just don't think he really brought a whole lot of oomph to the game. But I did not mind what I saw out of Mays. Again, any last pick overall in the draft is a long shot likely, and I would have gone in a different direction here based on some of the guys that went undrafted. But, you know, he's not awful. But we'll see where he goes from here. And there were some interesting moments I saw, especially with regards to his feet and using a bit of skill and putting pucks on net okay, that might be worth betting on. So that's it for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I am going to give them a 2D in line with about the Edmonton Oilers. Now, the Oilers drafted Sam O'Reilly, Toronto drafted Ben Danford. I think those two things are relatively comparable, even though those two guys play very different positions. I think they both kind of slot in at the bottom end of your lineup, but do so well and in a way that you do need. Outside of that, Toronto just kind of swung on guys that might develop into better hockey players than they already are. I didn't mind Johansson, but you're betting on physical development. I liked Miroslav Hinka for the skill level he has, but he really needs to refine his game and build other areas. Alexander Plasovsky, there were some interesting tools there and some okay pace in his game, but I just didn't really see a whole lot that was really rounding things out there either. And beyond that, I did like the pick of Timofeyev Vintsev as a goaltender option, and their 7th round picks, I wasn't a huge fan of any of them, really, but at least the defensemen have some range and some decent skill that you could work with, and maybe they become something in college in the future, but I'm not holding my breath. So that's it for Toronto, and if you liked it, you can check the description box for a Fanatics affiliate code, which will give us a small kickback on anything you buy in the store, or you could get a subscription to Scouching.ca, where you can get access to an exclusive Discord server, data tables for both drafted and undrafted players out there in the world, as well as live access to my rankings and plenty of other goodies you can check out at Scouching.ca. So that's it for Toronto, and the next one we're going to be going up the 401 highway and looking at the Ottawa Senators.